right. Welcome everyone to our first EPDM Summer School webinar. Today's webinar is an EPDM Summer School webinar, one of 3 webinars that we're hosting in the month of August on Enterprise PDM. And my name is Jordan Lumley. I'm going to be hosting all those webinars, and I'm a PDM specialist with Hawk Ridge Systems. And today, our topic for the webinar is going to be dispatch script creation and troubleshooting. In today's webinar and the webinars for EPDM Summer School this month are brought to you by a new program we're calling EPDM Academy, which is essentially just a way for Hawk Ridge to provide our users with additional information about EPDM, additional training. It's a good way to get a refresher on EPDM topics, and part of our goal with the EPDM Academy is to start increasing the amount of content on our YouTube channel so that you can go there and view little how-to videos on basic interface, admin, functions, all of those different aspects of Enterprise PDM, and get a good grasp on using the system. So that's part of our goal for today, is to get you to learn maybe a new part of the Enterprise PDM system that you've never seen before. So that's my hope. So what are we going to cover today? What are our goals? So what I want to do is introduce dispatch. What is it? How does it work? What's it good for? And then after talking about what it is, we're going to go through and actually create a dispatch script to rename a file. So that's going to be our use case for using dispatch. And then after we talk about the dispatch script and make a dispatch script on our own, we can discuss troubleshooting and what the general process is for coding up in dispatch and what troubleshooting looks like in dispatch. So, what is dispatch? The way I like to think about dispatch is that it is the middleman, or the in-between intermediate step between the out-of-the-box capability of Enterprise PDM and the full-on API coding. So you've got your out-of-the-box functionality, everything that you can do in the admin tool, and then EPDM has a fully open API, so you can code basically most anything you can think of to automate some process in EPDM. But if you don't know code, but you want some more functionality out of EPDM, what dispatch allows you to do is automate without knowing how to code. So that's what dispatch is. I like to think of the admin tool as the basic understanding of EPDM, dispatch is intermediate, and API coding is advanced. So that's how I like to think about dispatch. So why should you use dispatch? Well, the reason that you would use dispatch is, like I said, if there's any kind of capability that you want to automate that is not available through just the basic admin settings in EPDM. So this can be items like automatically checking out a file when it reaches a certain workflow state, or when you want to rename a file once it gets added to the vault, or when it reaches a certain workflow state. So you can have these triggers to automatically create these little scripts to run in the background and automate some process that you know EPDM can do, you just don't know how to automate it. So we're going to help you to understand that process a little more today. So a few additional notes before we jump in. Some common pitfalls that you will see when you run into making dispatch scripts. So one common pitfall is the upgrade process. Typically, upgrading dispatch is not a big deal, but sometimes you can run into the instance where, because dispatch does not upgrade when you upgrade to a new service pack or new version of SOLIDWORKS, that means that maybe something in the code has changed between 2013 and 2014 or 14 and 15. And so what can happen is you might have a dispatch script that works, and then you upgrade your system and it doesn't work anymore. So what you would need to do is update that dispatch script and make sure to save out your actions to ensure that those don't get removed when you upgrade. So that's one common pitfall. Another one is testing some sort of complex or file-altering dispatch script on a live vault. We recommend you do testing on a test vault before moving anything over into a live production environment, because you don't want to be creating files or making changes to them if you don't need to be or are not intending to. So making sure you understand that process in the test vault first, and then moving on to the production environment. And then finally, you must have the right to install and administer add-ins in order to start playing around with the dispatch add-in. So those are some of the things that you'll need to be aware of as you're taking a look at dispatch on your own system. And what I'm going to assume for this lesson, because it is an intermediate level lesson, is that you know the basics about EPDM. You know what workflows are, you know what data cards are and variables, and you've worked with EPDM long enough to know what those are. And so that's my assumption for your working knowledge of enterprise PDM in order to do the rest of this lesson. So that said, some additional resources that can help you out as you're exploring dispatch. The admin guide is super helpful. There's an entire section in there on dispatch. So for example, I can pull up the admin tool here. And if you just go to the help menu, there's the administration guide sitting right there. And what that will allow you to do is look for the dispatch section in your administration guide. So you see there's a whole chapter in there talking about dispatch, how to load it in if you don't already have it, and so on. So that can be super helpful, as well as the help files. So what are we going to do today? We're going to create a dispatch script, and this dispatch script is going to rename a file. We're going to take the serial number from that file and rename the file with that serial number. And then we're going to create a prompt, an OK message box, to verify whether those files are checked in. And then we're going to adjust our dispatch script to not just rename one file, but rename a group of files. And then we're going to rename a file for any extension if we have the time, and we're going to save the action. So scripting principles that I'm going to be using as we go through this. Usually what you want to do is start simple and add your complexity later. What this allows you to do is understand where your dispatch script might be going wrong to debug. Because if you start with the complete code and you've never tested it and something goes wrong, it's very difficult with many variables and many different actions going on in the background. It's very difficult to understand what is going wrong. So if you start simple, you eliminate a lot of the potential problems that could be there, and you know, okay, I just added this step, and now the code that was working before is not working, so I know that this new step, something's wrong with that. So that's just a basic scripting principle to start simple and add complexity later. You want to test early and often, making sure that this dispatch script works. And you want to use message boxes as often as you can to understand what's happening, what the variable names are, and use that to understand what's happening in the background with the code. I also tend to use the admin account so that I don't run into any permissions errors based on a user. So I know that what I'm using is not permissions related, and then once I start using it with a user and maybe I see errors, maybe it's a permissions related issue. And then finally, like I said before, I typically use a test vault to test my dispatch scripts just so I'm not accidentally making changes to files that I don't intend to. So with that said, we'll go ahead and get started on our dispatch script. And what I'll do to access dispatch is, there's a couple ways to get at it, but I can go through the admin tool or in Windows Explorer. And the way that you access it in Windows Explorer is you go to Tools and Administrate Actions. And this is where you can start adding dispatch scripts. So what I'm going to do is add a new dispatch script. I'm going to call it rename file, and I'll put a dash dispatch, just so that I don't get it confused with the Windows function file rename. And I'll give it a description, rename set of files with serial number. Now, what is this interface over here with the activation and the 4 checkboxes? Well, the menu commands checkbox, what this allows me to do is right-click on a file and activate this dispatch script. So menu command allows me to right-click and manually activate the script. These other 3 options allow for some automation. So for example, if I click during state transition, what that means is I can activate this or trigger it when a certain state transition is met. So it asks for, let's say, a path. Normally this is if this dispatch script only applies to a certain folder, but if it applies to every file inside the vault, we'll just type a %, which is the wildcard for dispatch. And that allows me to run this dispatch script no matter where the file is stored in the vault. And then I get to choose when this file or when this script runs. Does it occur after or before a state change? And which state change is it happening at? So if I send a file to release, before that file gets released, do I want the dispatch script to run, or do I want to run it after the file has been released? So there's a couple options there. And that just allows you to automate your dispatch script so that it runs in the background without you having to manually click on a file to activate it. Same thing applies to a file being checked out or being added when it's first added into the vault. So for example, you could automatically check in documents during add. That can be one option of a dispatch script that you write. But what I'm going to do first is just simply add an action. And so if I click add, there's a list of actions that you can use in dispatch. So this includes check-in, check-out, adding a options box or a combo box, copying a file to another directory, moving a local folder, adding an OK message box, renaming the file. There's a lot of these different commands that you can use in dispatch. What I'm going to do first is just create an OK message box and click OK. And I'm going to say dispatch script is run. And I'll click OK. And so now what my dispatch script will do is when I right-click on a file, it's going to execute all of these commands. And since there's only one command prompt with a message box, that's the only thing that I'm going to see. So this will just verify that dispatch is running, and you'll get to see how it works to be testing each part of the process of creating a dispatch script. So I'll click OK. Now I have a working dispatch script. I can right-click on a file. And if I go to rename file dispatch, it will show that OK message box. So that verifies that dispatch is running. So I'll go back to administrate actions and take a look at my file, my dispatch action file. So now we can start getting into the meat of making changes to my document. So what I'm going to need to do is add an action for renaming a file. So the first thing I'll do is add and go to rename file. And it's going to ask me for the path of the file that needs to be renamed, and I can reference a selected file via this dynamic variables button. So I can build out that list. I can say directory of selected file, and maybe I also want to add the name of the selected file. So this would tell me C Acme flashlight folder, and the name of my selected file would be lenscover.soldprt, as you can see over there. That builds out the entire path length which I need in order to specify which file I'm renaming. But then I also need to come up with a new file name, and I need to rename it with a serial number. And I need to know what variable is referenced in the data card. So what I'm going to do is check that real quick on my data card. So if I look at my lens cover, I can see that I want this drawing number to become the new name for the file. And if I want to know what variable that's tied to, I can click the help button over here and then simply click on that box, and it will show me that the variable name for that particular edit box is number. And so I can use that in my dispatch actions. We'll go back to administrate actions, and I'm going to go into new file name, and I want the new file name to reference the serial number. And the way I do that is by using a user-defined variable. I'm going to edit variables, and I'm going to define my own variable that references that particular value from the data card. So I'm going to call this d_serial number, and I'm going to choose variable value from selected file data card, and the value is going to be number based on what I saw from the help button on the data card. Find the number variable, make sure it references the app configuration. So now if I go to the dynamic variable button, I'm able to see that my new user-defined variable shows up there. And I also need to add an extension to my file name as well. So it can't just be serial number because it needs an extension. So I could add .soldprt, but then that doesn't really cover this rename action for instances where I've got a drawing or a part or an assembly. And so I would need to make sure that that extension applies for all of the SOLIDWORKS documents I'm going to be editing and renaming. So what I'll do here is add another variable, user-defined variable, that makes use of the extension. So I'm going to call this D for dispatch _. I'll call this extension. And this one is going to be a static string. And the value, I'm going to use a string function. I'm going to use the string function right. And what this allows me to do is select from the right a certain number of characters starting from the right. So in this case, I've got ABC, 2. And what that indicates is that the value for this variable is going to be BC, because it will start from the right and take 2 characters moving to the left. So that means it will start with C and grab B as well, because those are 2 characters from the right. so that my value for D underscore extension is BC. So I want to do the same thing with my file name and grab the extension off of the current file name and add it to my new file name. What I'll do is add that file name, say file variables, name of selected file, and I'm going to move 7 characters from the right. So that's SLDPRT, which is 6 characters, plus the dot that comes after the name. So dot SLDPRT, that's 7 characters. I want to grab those 7 characters from the right of the name of the file. So building that should give me the correct file name and file extension. So I'll click OK and add that to my new file name. User-defined variables, the extension. So now I have the serial number plus .SLDPRT or whatever the extension is. And now I've got that new file name ready to go. Now, before I go ahead and start this rename process, what I want to do is add the values that I have in rename file to my OK Message Box so that I can understand what the final values for these path lengths or path names are. So I'm going to copy and paste that into my message box, and this will display the values for directory of selected file, name of selected file, and I'll say current file path, and I'll create one as well for the new file name. And I'll just copy paste. Copy paste allows me to see exactly what I've typed into the rename file function so that I have a good idea if I've made any mistakes. So I'll go ahead and move that down. And so rename file will happen first, and then I'll get an OK message box letting me know what the directories are. So I'll click OK and run my dispatch script. So I'm going to try and rename this lens cover from lens cover to CAD 35. I'll right click on the file. And I'll go to rename file dispatch. And it says that there's an error renaming the file. So let's take a look at what I've got here. I've got the current file path and the new file name. New file name looks fine, but the current file path, it's got C, Acme, flashlight, and then the name of the file. So what's missing here is a backslash to indicate that this file is underneath of the flashlight folder, not that the file's name is flashlight lens cover. So I need to go back and add that slash into the file path in order to complete the action. I'll go back to administrate actions, get a rename, add my directory slash in there. Do the same thing over here. Click OK. And so now my rename function should work. So that's the important part of using OK message boxes to diagnose what is going wrong with a particular script. So I was able to see that the path name was incorrect. There we go. I've got my path name. That looks good. New file name. That looks good. I'll click OK. I'll refresh, and there's CAD 35. My lens cover has been successfully renamed, which is great. Now I also want to create a prompt to verify whether the files are checked in or not. So I'm going to go back into Administrative Actions, and I'm going to create a OK Message Box, or not an OK Message Box, sorry, a YesNo Message Box. I'm going to say, are the files checked in? Yes or no, 1 or 0. And the variable that I'm going to create to store that yes or no value is going to be a runtime variable, a variable that only occurs when the dispatch script is run. I'm going to call that the yes, no. So I'll click OK. I'll move that up. Click OK. And I'll run that same script on another file. So we see that dialog box, are the files checked in? It renames the file, and I can continue editing my action. So what I want to do with that information, the yes or no, is if the file is not checked in, then I want to skip the process. I want to not rename the file. So the way that I can do that is by adding a couple actions into my commands. So the first one is going to be a label. I'm going to call that label end. The second one is going to be a jump command. The jump command is basically an if-then statement. So if yes, no is equal to, in this case, 0, it's not checked in, then go to label end. So what this does is it says if the file's not checked in, yes, no is equal to 0. The file's not checked in, then go to label end, or basically skip all of the functions until you find that label end, and then continue from there. And because that's the end of the script, it basically has the effect of skipping all of the rename functions, and clicking no will skip me to the end. So I'll create that jump and move that up to right underneath of my YesNo Message Box. So if I run this script, what I should see by clicking no is that the script does not run. I won't see that OK Message Box, and I won't have a file renamed. Are the files checked in? I'll say no. And so if I look at this clip slotted, I've got CAD-28, and if I refresh, the file name has not changed. So that is how I can create dependencies or if-then statements inside of my dispatch script. Now, let's say that I wanted to rename a group of files and not just one file. If I tried to rename multiple files at the same time, like this end cover and head, what you're going to find is that only one of the files moves through and gets the change. You see that head changed, but end cover did not. And so what I want to do is enable my dispatch script to run for all files when I have multiple files selected. So I'm going to go ahead and add that into my dispatch script. So the way that you can add that is by clicking Add and going to For All Documents. That's the end for all documents. I need a start for all documents. Here we go. So it says block end and block start. So I'm going to move my for all documents up. This will apply to all documents. And then it will end for all documents. And what this start and end for all documents does is it makes sure that this dispatch script runs for all the documents that I have selected. So if I go back and select multiple files once again, I should be able to, files checked in, yes. And you see that the dialog boxes are running for each file. We'll go ahead and fix that after this, but both files should be renamed. So holder and lens should disappear, and they do. They get renamed with the appropriate serial number, which is what I expect. So how do I make sure that I don't get a dialog box for every single file? Because if I select 100 files, I don't want to receive 100 dialog box prompts. So what I'll do is go back in here, and what I need to make sure happens is that this for all documents doesn't start until the rename. So if I go down, before the rename happens, I want to make sure that all files get renamed, but I don't want my message boxes to be included in between the start and end of for all documents. Otherwise, these message boxes will run every single time that a file is, or for every single file that is selected, rather. So if I run this script again, what I should see is that renaming the file, are the files checked in? Yes, that's current path. I should probably select a couple of files that don't have a serial number. We'll run that. Checked in, yes, okay. And so those files change their name to the serial number. So multiple files at a time are being selected, and I'm only getting prompted with the OK message box once instead of multiple times for that particular set of files. All right. So let's say that I was testing this particular action, dispatch action, in EPDM in a test vault. And I wanted to copy my dispatch script to my main vault. How would I do that? So in that case, you would want to go into your admin tool. And what you can do is go to add-ins and select dispatch and go to administrate actions. This is exactly the same as going into Windows Explorer and selecting tools and administrate actions. I'll click administrate actions, and I want to save this file or this action as a file so that I can copy it to another location. So I'm going to save it. I'm going to save it to a certain directory. I'm going to call this dispatch action to rename files. I'll save that. Click OK. And so now if I open another vault, let's say my vault that doesn't have a dispatch script, I can load it in from my saved action. So the action that I saved earlier, dispatch action to rename files, I click open, and now that file has been added to dispatch in my production vault rather than my training or test vault. So that is a process that you should go through to copy your actions from one vault to another, which is really helpful. Also, you'd want to save out your actions anytime you are upgrading the dispatch action so that you don't run into any issue where you have upgraded your dispatch action and your actions have gone away. Another thing to mention about dispatch as well is if you go into dispatch, you can also copy your actions. So if there is some sort of action like renaming a file and you wanted to rename a file based on another criteria, maybe in this case I wanted to rename the files that I'm using with the document number as opposed to the drawing number, but I still wanted to keep the original action. What you can do is simply copy the current action, paste it in, and it will create an exact copy of that action. And so all I would really need to do at that point is find the variable name for document number and point to that in my dispatch action. So in this case, I'm looking at a document number. So if I were to look in my copy, I just simply need to go to rename file, serial numbers, look at my user-defined variables, and change that serial number from number to document number. Call this document number. And so now that action that I'm reusing can apply to document numbers as well. And I still get to keep the original drawing number alteration. So if I right-click on this file and go to rename file with the document number, file's checked in, yes. And now that switch changes to a document number instead of the CAD number. So that's a way to reuse your actions and not have to write a new action every time you create a series of actions that are similar but different, as well as how to save out those actions before upgrading or to copy your action to another directory. So what have we covered? We created a dispatch script that renames a file based on criteria that I've set up. We created a prompt to verify whether that file was checked in or not. We were able to rename a group of files, and we were able to rename a file with any extension, SOLIDWORKS part, assembly, or drawing. And we were also able to save out an action as a separate file. Now, as far as troubleshooting goes, some things to keep in mind with making sure that your dispatch script works is to create those OK message boxes like we did so that you can understand what the path names are, what the file names are, so that you can diagnose any errors that might be happening at that point. Also stepping through each step of the dispatch script one at a time. Maybe creating a jump sequence that will end after one step and then moving the jump sequence around so that you can test each step individually and see what might be causing the problem. And then third, check your version of dispatch. Just make sure that your version of dispatch is the latest version in Service Pack. Sometimes that can be an issue with dispatch scripts. So that is all of the content that I have for you today. I want to thank you for attending our EPDM Summer School webinar on Dispatch, presented by EPDM Academy. And if you have any questions, feel free to type those into the webinar interface, and I'll try and take those for the next 10-15 minutes or so. And I want to thank you again for attending the webinar, and hopefully it was helpful for you. You discovered some new interesting features of EPDM through Dispatch, and be on the lookout for new webinars. We've got 2 more EPDM Summer School webinars coming up in the month of August. One on tips and tricks for EPDM, so everything from search tool to other less used features in EPDM. So that should be pretty helpful, as well as another webinar on custom properties. So be on the lookout for those, and you can sign up for those on our website under webinars. And also be on the lookout for our YouTube channel, which is going to be being updated with a lot more EPDM videos from EPDM Academy. So once again, thanks for joining, and I'll go ahead and start taking questions.